culverts from them guys?
No,
Yes, if you are.
we do not get from them.
All right. Sorry.
Sorry.
We'll go ahead and call the meeting for the Technical Advisory Committee meeting for February 5th. We'll do roll call. Steve Baking mentioned he's not going to be here. Ralph Stark. Mike Von Bergen.
Here.
Thomas Rose. Here. Mike Warner.
Here.
Jody McCarthy. Pete Manhard. Brian Valesky.
Present.
Bruce Meyer.
Here.
Zach.
Here.
Dan Ziller. or Seth. Scott Hayjack.
Here.
Spring Duffy.
Here.
Ernest Varda.
Here.
Darren Olson and Andrea said they couldn't make it. Brad Andresen should be running late, but not here now. Tyler Wilkie or Cody Book. All right, so. Oh, okay, we got a form. We'll go ahead and move to item 2.1, minutes approval of our December meeting. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
Move to approve by Ernest, second by Mike Warner. Any discussion before we go to vote? I hear none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Okay. We'll go ahead and move to item 3.1, election, or item 3, election of officers, starting with the chairman. So just, Steve Bicking has been the chair. His preference is that I take some of that pressure off with him and kind of lead through the agenda. If someone else wants to do it or has a different nomination, by all means, can do all this stuff if you would like, but with that, we'll, open it up for any nominations. Steve,
I'll nominate Steve Bicking.
Second.
Yeah, I was not aware there's a ton of pressure associated with the chairman.
I'm not trying to make it look like there's pressure. The way Steve likes it is if I just run it for him, so obviously if you did want to, okay,
That's how
so.
we got voted in last time.
Well, he was here last time, he's not gonna be here, it doesn't mean he can't be nominated.
That's all right,
Guys,
that's all right.
Vote for him. Get there and then- All right, so
Don't honestly.
we've got a nomination for Steve from Mike and a second from Spring. Any other nominations, discussions on Steve? Hearing none, we'll go to vote for Steve to be chairman. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
That's what you get for that.
Okay. Steve is chair. I'm sure he's not gonna mind, but, okay, we'll go ahead and, move for vice chairman. Any nominations? I forget who it was. I didn't write it down here, but.
Let's see, Al Schmidt's not here. How about it?
Was it Jody? I don't remember.
I think it was
I
Jody.
think it was Jody.
Well, she's not here either, Ernest, so.
She's not here either. There you go.
Self-move.
Okay, so nomination for Jody from Spring. Is there a second? Bruce seconds. Okay. Any other nominations, discussion? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and move to vote. All in favor for Jody as vice chair?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. We don't have any public comment, so we'll move to item number 5. Any members' comments? Hearing none, we'll move to item 6.1, full business.
I do have a comment.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to double check on this meeting date and time.
Okay.
You know, I don't know if it's good for everybody. I have an alternate, you know, May Zoo is my alternate, but this is the same date and time as the DuPage TAC.
Okay.
So, it got canceled today, but she was gonna come, when we switched. But, we can keep doing that, and I can miss, you know, half of the meetings here, whatever, it's not that big a deal. I talk to May all the time, and it's probably easy transition, but I don't know if anybody else has any conflicts with this date and time.
I do.
Yeah.
I have a conflict at the same time.
Okay. Well, I suppose we can try to find a different date or in time for the group. I know we originally, from how we did it previously, we had the second Tuesday? I think is what we would do, right?
Second Tuesday, 9:30.
We left that for some reason, I don't
I
remember.
think it was.
I think it was
us.
the
We had a-
You-
Conservation
we had a-
District, yeah.
Yeah, we were gonna have difficulty getting anyone here.
Well, I'm open to discuss, cater to you, obviously, I'll make whatever work for me.
You guys went back to what it was? That worked for you before, didn't it? I mean,
Yeah, but it doesn't work for
It
him.
doesn't work for Conservation District.
So, about the first Tuesday or third Tuesday,
Should we try it different? Should we go to Wednesday or something? Is that a better day for anybody?
Does it time, is it the time or is it the day?
So the
What
first,
was the time on that day?
the first
Oh, the
Tuesday,
time.
the first Tuesday will conflict with a PED meeting typically. They're on the first Tuesday.
Zach just said that it's the time.
It's the time?
So could we shift it later in the day?
Yeah, I'll have to verify, I'm not sure if there's commitments for these rooms, but you guys tell me, I can explore these. And then, what we can do is figure out for March. So do you want me to explore Tuesday afternoon, the first or second Tuesday, second Tuesday in the afternoons?
Mike,
I
the
really
motion
like,
for 5
we
a.m.
like things early in the morning if you're gonna do that, because that really blows the afternoon.
Well,
Yeah.
that's why we were trying to find an alternate for the mornings.
But if you got the majority that wanna show up on a certain time, I think you need to go with that.
Well, that's what I'm trying to ask the group and see what what, either Tuesday or Thursday, I don't know.
Mike, is the DuPage, is that always the first Tuesday of the month?
it's this, yes,
I'm sorry, first
First
Thursday.
Thursday.
first Thursday,
Would
yes.
you like the second Thursday?
Sure, okay, okay.
Yeah, the second Thursday, the third Thursday is the Lake County TAC.
Right.
So the second Thursday is open.
So many tax. The battle of the tax.
Tax every Thursday.
Wait, commit yourself to those tax.
I go to 4 of them.
Is it?
Here, I can get out a meeting portal up. So there is committee of the whole, mayor commission.
Is May your alternate on all of them?
Looks like
Yes.
second Thursday might be bad. In terms of having availability for these rooms, we could meet somewhere downstairs. So, obviously, I don't think any of us have committee of the whole commitments, but,
We've met downstairs before,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, the room in the bed, the old cafeteria.
or the other one.
Or, yeah, right around the little cafeteria area.
I'm thinking that, but, you know.
Okay, let me explore that option, and we can try to move it to second Thursday. We'll need to set something for March and then approve the change, since you guys already approved the schedule moving forward. So, in terms of next month's meeting, is this time gonna be a problem? Do we wanna try to do the second Thursday? And then and then I'll print out a new schedule showing that, and you guys can approve that.
Would earlier, I mean, would 8 o'clock?
Yeah, what time do you guys
be better?
want?
I don't care.
8:30, 8?
For March the 2nd, Thursday, it's gonna be Foxford Summit. Here. I don't know how many people go
That's
to
a
that.
one-time
It's a
thing.
one-time
Yeah,
off.
it's a one-time thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and
Convention.
actually, I think that's gonna be IAFSM.
Yes.
So do we wanna stick to the first Thursday here? Or just for March?
Next month or.
For the next month? Would it be okay? Okay. So we'll keep it still March 5th. And then I'll put a new calendar for you guys in your schedule, looking at the second Thursday for
8:30.
8:30?
Yeah. Does that work for everybody, 8:30?
Or earlier.
Yeah, my Thursdays are kind of.
It's like 6:30.
He said 5 initially, so he said 5 o'clock initially, so you're getting a quite.
I'd have to prop the door
So you're
open.
missing one.
No, that's why I was late today, because my staff meetings are almost every Thursday, because I'm on 3 different staff meetings that rotate and they're usually from 8 until 10, but they get over early from time to time, so, yeah, Thursday, 8:30, probably exclude me from more than half of the meetings. And my alternate is also in the same.
All Thursdays?
Almost, like, I can make 9:30 work, 9:30-ish work, but if we went earlier,
Do Wednesdays work for people? Tuesdays and Thursdays seem to be the issue.
yeah, 9:30 would work, and I could just be, I would just be a little bit late, depending on how late the staff meetings run.
Or 10? I don't know. When, I heard some
What about-
conversation for
Who said the
Wednesday.
Wednesdays, the second Wednesdays?
Cause like the 11th is open there.
The only problem relying on this is, there's hidden, that's why I gotta go talk to admin, because not everything is gonna be on here, these are just kind of the main,
Even for downstairs, that worked all right down there.
Yes.
okay,
Wednesdays
so
work.
Wednesdays, second Wednesday, 8:30?
Wednesday, sure, fine.
All right, I will explore that. If I hit a snag, what I'll do is kind of listening to what you guys have, I'll put a couple of schedules together for you all so we can
Have
approve
a
approve one of those so we don't have to do this again. Okay, we'll do that. So then for
It's the second Wednesday?
second Wednesday. 8:30 is what I'll look to do,
So March 11th.
yes. But for March, that's gonna conflict with, IFSM, which is probably gonna take out the majority of this group. So for March, I guess we have 2 options. The current schedule is for March 5th. We try to stick with that, knowing that there could be a couple of concerns for a few of you. We either cancel March's meeting, but, still, again, we gotta approve something, or we try to find a different date in March. And I can try to do, whatever, maybe we can try to do towards the end of the month if you want, or the 18th.
I'm on the 18th,
So I just wanna see if you guys wanna keep it March 5th or change the March date at this point. Darren, I know you might,
Yeah, either May or myself will be
Okay.
here.
all right, well, just tell May, we're gonna post the agenda. So if there's multiple schedules, tell her which one you would prefer, you guys talk it out.
Okay.
All right, so we'll keep March 5th, I'll put together a schedule focusing on that second Wednesday and get that on that agenda. All right, any other comments, discussion? All right. we'll move into item 6.1. This is the runoff rate reduction. So what I had placed in your packet was what I presented to the Stormwater Commission. So they liked the concept and they basically said, send it back to TAC to make sure that the technicals work out, that there's proof of concept behind the changes. So it's very similar to what we had discussed previously. One of the big things was looking at the critical duration storm events. So those are in there. So we'll just go through that portion. The second part for the release rate component is fairly similar, just to touch base on it again. So if this sticks, and you know, I have a little bit of a twist in there to throw in there, but I think that, you know, we probably can start focusing on some of the details of this going for agreement. So I'll just run through it. The language, I did clean up the language a little bit here from previously, from what you all saw, in that the exemption would be basically for up to 10% of the property. Again, it would be making sure that the existing drainage patterns are not changed. The discharge from the development flows to a channel, and that the demonstration is that there wouldn't be an increase by more than 1/10 of a foot. We've kind of dubbed that the county simplified method, or they can, an engineer can be used to show that there wouldn't be the increase to have detention. I'll go through that in the lower section. And then we threw in the idea that the enforcement officer would have an ability to, you know, ask for additional calculations or have some reservation depending on known flood risks. And draft language, we can massage this, but that's the general idea. So I'll skip down to the part. So I prepared this mostly for the commission, the stormwater committee members. Not all of them have the same technical background, so I'll just kind of go through this in the same fashion. We can dissect it and you guys can, you know, look at it closer. But the big change is removing the flood, the development shall not result in flood damage. With flood damage, the definition being a measurable rise in flood heights at a building. So I was just trying to point out that, you know, you can have ag land, septic system driveways that can be damaged from flooding or result in flooding that's not related to any type of building component. Then with that discussion, replacing flood damage with minimal flood risks, and kind of taking a page out of Illinois' floodplain guidelines in terms of not having increases in water surface elevation by more than 1/10 of a foot. This one here, the reason why we had this component is if you're going to analyze water surface elevations, there needs to be some kind of, this is the definition currently in SMO for channel, so river, stream, creek, brook, branch. I highlighted flow path just in case we wanted to look at that. You know, I can see someone arguing, you know, anything is a flow path. But that's the idea, is now we can, you know, you have something, so if it's sheet flowing into the neighbor, then this exemption wouldn't apply because it's not, it's hard to define a water surface elevation across sheet flow. So some kind of swale or ditch, you know, drainage way, a lot of the subdivisions have those along property lines, et cetera, whatever it is, that's what we would be looking at. And then this was something that we discussed last time, is we would be looking at the critical flows from that and comparing the existing versus proposed. And so we ran some models and we took some storm events, added some pipes and some swales. So I'll show the results of that in that one example, but we took a 24-inch pipe at 0.5%. We took a ditch with 3-to-1 side slopes, 3 feet wide, 0.5% slope, and what we found is when you run the numbers, about 1 CFS. Now that's gonna vary in this model, when I ran it, the pipe was at like 70-80% full. If it's not full, or in this case, when it's more full, this might come down to around 0.9. So right around that like 1 CFS range is what you're looking at for that type of pipe. And then for the swale, you're looking at around 2 1/4 for that 1/10. So some considerations I threw out to them was, are we setting up a good baseline with a 24-inch pipe in this type of ditch? Do we want to modify that at all? Obviously, that's going to affect those flow differences for that 1/10 of an increase. So as I mentioned, the commission was on board with the idea. They're looking at us to sort through those technical and computational components. So, okay. So if there's no questions, I'll go into the example, and then I'm sure you guys are gonna have some components. So, I took a random site here, and I just said, all right, I'm gonna do 1 acre of impervious right in this area. I took this as the tributary area. I suppose with the sheet flow, you could include more of it. I was just trying to be, not delay too much. So the way this would work, hopefully, with our GIS tools is that someone can come onto their site and say, hey, I'm gonna do a project right here, click. And we would have a tool that would give them that tributary area. So this is something that they can obtain, hopefully. So I'm still working on the updates from GIS to see what that's gonna look like, but I know we have the capabilities. King County has something that does that within their viewer. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it. So I know we can do it, I just don't know what it's going to look like. So that's the first thing, we get our tributary area. The next thing is I gave a general description to the commission, the idea of curve numbers. Now, this isn't a curve number of 50, means that about half, that's not the case, it's not a 50%, but I was just trying to, because you do have other abstractions and other considerations, but just to kind of give them an idea of kind of how to consider how curve numbers work. So it was meant to just give them the rundown, and we've discussed that at length here. So for this one, I assigned a curve number of 74, which would represent open space at 75%. I don't know that is, again, just for the sake of the example, that's what I went with, looking at the aerials. Then time and concentration based on this flow path. Again, this would be something that, since we have the LiDAR, I know that currently the contractor for us that has that already has on a larger scale, they can get those flow path lengths and everything based on that contour information. So it's just about, tying in the property lines into that and how it gets segmented. But we do have the capability, again, King County does that as well. So we can get that distance for the flow line. It should be able to give us a slope from the LiDAR data. So we would be able to obtain a lot of the information related to the time of concentration. There would be some simple inputs on the user to indicate, is it grassed, is it paved? And, we can develop that with yes or no answers, and then it automatically, pulls the right values in. So, and this was just a demonstration you get. Pretty sure a lot of you have seen the TR55 worksheet, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But a lot of these things we can, have answers to or questions and auto-populate. Right. That's the idea. So we have everything we need here. I was giving them some information on the composite curve number, and then, I ran the numbers. So I ran the critical. Depending on if you're looking at proposed or existing, it's the 30-minute or the 1 hour. And I listed the flow differences here. Obviously, they're going to be much higher in those shorter duration events. But here's what it showed. So if you were to do a 1 acre impervious area based on that current condition, you'll get a flow difference of 6. here's what the results are for that 24-inch pipe. I did have a concern with this, so I reran this later, but I did have a concern since I had a 24-inch pipe. This is obviously saying it's going outside of the pipe. I don't know if it's holding that 24-inch column and just going up or how it's calculating it, but this is what it shows. Obviously, this would be more than 1/10 of an increase. So this would not meet the simplified exemption under this requirement. And here's what it looks like in this swale. So same idea, we have more than 1/10 of an increase, and I think this was part of the concern from some of the TAC that, hey, last time we were looking at the 24-hour comparison, and that's why we went to do the critical duration. So there was validity to those concerns. So this was the raw data. So I went in, and this is the setup here, the visual. So basically what I did, let me go back here. I basically just toggled the data to find these values, these increases. You know, I just artificially lowered this flow rate here proposed until I got to that 1/10 of an increase, and then I just looked at the difference. So again, for the pipe, it's about 1 CFS, for the swale, it's about 2.25. So I didn't feel confident enough because of these pipe flow results going out of the pipe. And so this is the result. This is the existing condition with the full 2 acres. So you guys can look through that, make sure I didn't screw anything up. It's been a while since I modeled anything. And then the proposed, so there's that 2.24 in the existing, and then that 2.76 in the proposed. And then here's the swale. We've got depth 0.48 feet in the existing, in the proposed 0.72. So I'm just giving you guys the printout from the modeling. So more kind of technical hawks, if there's something, let me know. So what I wanted to do then was run a different scenario. So I lowered the area here, and I wanted to get a high water level that's contained within the pipe. So now there wouldn't be any question about the constraints going above that and how the model's handling it. So I just modified the inflow area until I got something within the pipe. So I've got a peak flow here of 2.1 with the water elevation within the pipe at 1.74 feet, so just shy of the 2 feet. Then I took my proposed conditions, I kept the same inflow area, but I toggled the curve number for that, and I just ran it until I got about, so this was 1.74, and I just ran it until I got 1.84, and then I looked at the flows. So the difference would be 2.1 to 2.89, so roughly 0.8, if you will. So again, right around that 1 CFS mark. Just making sure everything was contained in the pipe. So that would be the simplified method, where you would run the analysis and compare those flow rates, and if none of these in the critical duration were more than 1 for a pipe, then we would say, okay, we feel comfortable that there isn't going to be increased flood risks, or if it's a swale or a ditch, it would be that 2.25. That's the simplified method. So if that doesn't work out, in the following scenario, I took a larger area, 77 acre site, or 80, whatever it is, with just a large ditch, farm ditch area through the middle. When you look at aerials, you can see it's defined. You look at the contours, everything. So same idea, I took a 1 acre, the site's up here, I took a 1 acre, everything flows down to the ditch, longest flow path, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the results of that. So when you incorporate that larger area, basically, there's not a lot of changes in right, that makes sense. You're not impacting that 77 acres enough, and I think that's where we had discussed on larger parcels, it doesn't just have to be ag, what would be the impact? So this would be one where you're showing less than, so in this case, it would be a swale, so we'd be looking at the 2.25 flow increase. So how this varies, and I can't remember, I'll look at the results. I don't know if I included this, but I also ran a scenario where I went up to the 10%, which is about 7 acres. And the height difference in the swale is about 0.02. However, if you looked at that 1 hour time frame, the increase in the peak flow is about 10 CFS. So when you're using the exemptions, you would go through and all of a sudden, on this particular example, if you're using the simplified method where you're trying to use all our tools, you wouldn't meet the exemption because you're over that 2.25. However, if you use the engineer can then design the actual conditions for that large swale to show that you would be less than that 1/10 of a foot. And then that would be the other way of exempting detention. So it doesn't remove the need for an engineer, but there's no other way to model all of these different downstream conditions that might still meet the flood risk of less than 1/10 of a foot increase in flood height. Let me just go through the data real quick, Mike, before. So again, this is the inflow data. There's the storage for that, and just showing those increases. So anybody, okay, Mike, go ahead.
So on this particular piece here, so I happen to farm this farm in your example.
I didn't know that.
So you should have asked
I
first.
I swear it was random.
like real life here, so there's about 300 to 400 acres that come into this farm. It's all flat, but the way it's just enough slope that the water will sit over on the west side and then it flows to the east out of this.
Correct.
I wonder if does that change those calculations? There's no fence lines, it's all wide open, but you know, there's multiple 80s, but there's no restrictions out there.
Well,
Does that change anything?
that's what I modeled. Like I looked at cross sections across the swale area, and I put that into the model.
Okay.
So the idea here is that you wouldn't be analyzing offsite. It would be more so what's the impact of, you know, you're directly affecting this area,
Yeah.
right? The flow is coming to this middle area. So that's where the engineer would be able to come in and make those judgments and assessments and accurately show what the downstream conditions are with the premise and the assumption that if you're having a small increase here, that the impacts that are felt down. Now, obviously this is on a small piece from a larger watershed scale perspective. I don't know, like if everybody took advantage of 10% across the board, what it would look like downstream.
Well, I know what it's like downstream, because then the next one over from that, that's where it all goes, and that is another one we farm, so it all ends up over there, so like where the arrow is in that example there, there's a tile, there's an 8-inch tile there and it stops. And then from that 80 and so on, there's no more tile in that area.
So yeah, I wasn't even aware of that situation, but that's where like it could get complicated to where when you're trying to go for the exemption, you're having larger increases in flow, right? That's where the engineer can come in, oh, hey, there's a tile, he can incorporate that into the design to show what's actually happening. So it doesn't relieve the need for an engineer, but it could eliminate the need for a detention basin. And because of this scenario, and I'm sure that there's plenty others where you're gonna show high increases of flow, but it actually, when you look at the actual impact from a peak and a volume perspective, the downstream infrastructure might be fine.
It's
But-
not.
But, well, I said it might be fine, but there's no way for us to be able to,
Well, you don't
case by case basis.
Yeah.
So this would be on a case-by-case basis, but to your point, if we know that there's an issue then on the neighboring property, that's where the enforcement officer, even for a municipality, can come in and say, yeah, it's great that it works here, but I don't know that it works over here, and I need you to take that into account and see what's happening over here as well. You know, there's just no way to do because right now the exemptions are meant to be easy, right? So one way would be you're showing minimal flow rate increases. The other way would be actually analyzing these, and that's gonna be on a case-by-case basis. So that's why in the language we have the component for the licensed engineer demonstrating that. So you can run the numbers and see what you get in the quote-unquote simplified method. If it works, great. If it doesn't, then maybe you can demonstrate, that the engineer can demonstrate that there's still, the impacts are gonna be minimal. It's an emphasis on minimal.
When you say that the next property isn't good, what's the problem with that?
So the one right next door, there's a swale that's cut through from all the water flow off of the other upstream stuff. And then we farm, and that one has a large wetland area in it, and that's kind of where the water goes, but then Wisconsin Southern Railroad track cuts through the corner of that property, and the tile ends up having to snake around and get through the track. It's collapsed in the railroad bed. The railroad won't fix it. There's a big, I don't know, it's like a 36-inch culvert, so now it just kind of pulls up and then goes under and then goes back into the 12 and heads off into everything now that's controlled by all the conservation district or the Hackmatack stuff over in that area. So now we got beaver problems in those areas and blocking a lot of that up. So now you're talking about, Spring did the watershed on this probably like 20 years ago on this whole area over there. And it's about 1,800 acres within this area over there that's could be impacted now by any type of, solar farm deal, which is devastating in this whole area.
I want to preface this that currently in the ordinance, we have these exemptions. So for this particular property, if someone wanted to go up to, 5% with no cap, it would be a similar type exemption, but now we're just providing a little bit better guardrails for that, if you will. And on a larger scale, if that's a pinch point, I think that's where we return to a lot of our watershed studies and work with stakeholders to identify projects for flood mitigation on a larger scale. So the two would kind of work together. We've got something on the site-by-site basis to kind of say, when you're doing development, if you follow some of these guidelines, flow restrictions, less than 1/10 of an increase, then that's gonna be, good enough. But at some point, there's a threshold where you might collectively start to have an impact or not. And so there's two different, and that's where we have criteria for smaller development, and then the larger criteria might be on a general watershed basis to have some kind of release rate for that particular watershed or sub-watershed due to those type of problems. So, this is kind of the foundational piece, and hopefully as we do our watershed planning and start investigating these areas, we can start to have a better idea of where some of these higher risks are and assign, higher priority levels to those areas.
I don't want to end up like what we heard a week ago down there at our conference with these solar farms and the disasters that they're having in these drainage districts of these things, so, of the flooding, so.
Well, and, currently solar farms in drain tiles, they're required, doesn't matter if it's solar farm, they're required to maintain drain tiles or repair drain tiles within their development area.
But it still goes back to, there's only been a desktop study of runoff from solar farms. There's no boots on the ground, physical study of runoff from solar farms. which is in the works right now. But that's not gonna be done for another year yet.
Who's doing this study?
I'm not sure.
Sorry, is this
I
big
just sent you
size?
that email the other day, Greg, I can't think of his last name, that's doing it.
I think it's just like various organizations.
It's through a
Nonprofit.
nonprofit, nobody's agenda on it, so it's not a grant or anything either, it's,
Right.
so it's gonna show supposed to show a truthful site to it. So
Truth is
not-
whoever
Not
is
weighted,
looking through it through their lens.
yeah, not weighted through one way or the other, if the solar company orders it, obviously it's gonna favor them.
Well, and that's why, that's part of the next steps for solar farms, using BMP's native vegetation and making sure that the vegetation is established. Part of it.
We're not very happy with any of that yet either.
We're never gonna win, Mike.
Oh, I didn't even know you're here.
But, I don't know if there's any, I just want to come back to, for now, come back to this exemption language and, this methodology here. Yes, Tracy?
So when I initially asked for you guys to look into this, it was basically because the 20,000 square foot for any size parcel is really what we were looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I would like to, and a few others on the Stormwater Committee, as well as county board members, would like to see that threshold be higher for larger parcels. Say 20 acres, could be like 3/4 of an acre.
Okay.
I think you could pretty easily fit that sentence in there.
Well, definitely, I think that one of the concerns and conversations we've had is it depends, yes, you can be talking about 20 acres, but it depends where you place that impervious. And so it's a review of that placement, and I would feel more comfortable that it gets incorporated into this process. I don't want to have, I think the concern is, so let's say it's half an acre for properties that are less than 20 acres and 1 acre for properties that are greater than 20 acres. It's like a potential language change.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at, because if you look at, 5 acre parcel, a half acre is 10% of that parcel. But if you're looking at like 20 acres, a half acre is, 2.5%. So theoretically, if I was allowed to split my parcel into 5 acre pieces, I could get way more just by, going around the rules. I know that sometimes is difficult with zoning, but initially that's, the ultimate problem is that, we have 40 acre parcels that are getting the same, now it's what, 21,780 versus the 20,000? Whether you're 5 acres or 40 acres or 80 acres.
Can I say something?
Yeah, I'd like input from the group. I don't want to lead it, but.
You've been focused very much on the detention aspect. It seems like in what you're saying, like you would have room for detention. So it's not really like apples to apples comparison. But at the same time, like if you were to take that and add a volume control component, you might be able to find a compromise there.
I think the problem though is if you're adding a volume control component, you need a design for that, right? You need an analysis, and where Tracy's coming from is the idea that you have a large enough parcel that 1 acre should just be allowed without those complications or
It's almost like a carrying capacity capability of that site, not needing to mitigate it, right?
Yeah, but I think that the hard part is though, if you're placing that impervious next to the roadway as opposed to in the back of your property, those are two different
Right.
scenarios. And so, we can look at that, and I still think that there should be some review related to that.
But that could happen with a 5-acre parcel as well.
Right. That's my point, whether you're 1 acre or 50 acres, you have the possibility of flooding someone out equally.
So you're considering in essence some type of buffer zone, no matter what the size?
No, I don't know, I'm just trying to, if you add more than 20,000 square feet, then this is triggered. If we have a comment saying if you're over 20 acres, then it's 1 acre, this is not triggered, and we won't be able to review the idea that this impervious area is where it's placed within that 80 acres.
It could be right on the edge and dumping onto the neighbor, just because it's an acre.
Theoretically.
That's what I was gonna say. Are you kind of saying, well, maybe there needs to be a buffer? So, okay, you can make 1 acre using Tracy's example, you can make 1 acre impervious, but it has to be a minimum of 500 feet from any
setback?
property line or something? I don't know.
That could be one, that could be one solution.
Because then at least you get a little bit of time before it's just dumping on the guy
Right.
next door.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
The buffer is a great idea. What about including a percent of the property? So, like if you said, okay, you got 80 acres and 5% of the property is 4 acres. That's a lot of impervious, but maybe you could say a couple percent, and say what's the percent that, makes it a difference, I guess. I don't know if you could study some scenarios, but if you got an 80-acre parcel, 2% of the property is 1.6 acres of impervious.
That's not very much for a farm operation.
So maybe it needs to be 5%.
Yes, we can. I still think there's, Steve's not here, but one of his things is, well, if you add an acre of impervious and you're along the property line, you're gonna have issues.
Right.
You're gonna have issues in that location. And so, this step eliminates that, but if we add an additional exemption to not go through this process, then I think, yeah, we would need to think about setbacks. I think that would be important, and other criteria. I'm just concerned that at that point, is it overly complicated? I don't know. I guess that's kind of what
The last barn we built, when we came in for the permit, we had the location of it, and then we had the property line, so there were setbacks in that. Has that gone away? Because it's been quite a few years since I built a barn.
No, that would be like a zoning setback, like how close you can have a building to your property line. But it would, this would be like a stormwater setback, I guess, if you will. And, but if we do that, that removes some of the ability of how you're gonna place it on your property and other components, related to that. Yeah, Thomas?
I mean, if you're going to have a setback, part of what we're trying to avoid is to have an engineer come in with an analysis, but if you do have the setback language, could you then say, unless otherwise stated with a professionally designed, detention basin, then you can be within the setback, but now you do have an engineer showing that it's not gonna impact downstream.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the engineer, again, he can just do this analysis and eliminate the detention basin for you.
Right.
That's without a doubt. The idea here of the half acre was that this, this mimics a lot of everything that we've seen. And in our discussions, it felt like a half an acre is probably the threshold you want to start looking at to make sure that you're not having issues on a neighboring property. And that goes for, anyone who owns property. If the neighbor next to you did this, just think about them placing an acre along your property line that drains onto your property, right? So the half acre seemed to be kind of where the group landed on, and then this idea would be that we would provide the tools to allow you to do as much impervious while taking all of these things into consideration. If we wanted to increase that threshold for larger sites, then I suppose it's still the same idea, but then you're not having to go through this process here. And you're relying on some kind of setback from the property line.
You tell me if I'm speaking out of turn here, but I think that's been agriculture's goal since the beginning of this thing, is that it needs to be apples to apples when you're comparing us to what you're doing here, because we have larger parcels. But we're getting hung up in the language that's in the stormwater on coverage areas, and how you're gonna control the water.
Well, we can go back to an agricultural exemption. I have no problem with that. The only thing is you guys have one already, right? And the thing is you have to demonstrate that you're not having any flood damage. So in my mind, that's what I'm trying to change for you guys, because that is hard. Because a lot of the times you flood damage, I showed you the definition, it involves a building and how the building is affected, right? That does not apply to agricultural land. And so in trying to clean that up, it was just trying to find a new way to demonstrate that whatever it is that you do on your property, you're not gonna have an impact on your neighbor. And doing it this way removes the need for an engineer. And what I'm hoping to have is, again, a process where it would be a tool you can go on and you just follow that process, and it provides the information. And this would open you up, again, to have 10% of the property, and there's a cap, obviously. The original exemption for the agricultural easement was a non-capped 5%, so theoretically you could go very large, but again, it included this idea that you have to demonstrate that there isn't going to be any, there won't be any issues.
Just to give a little perspective, I know enough to be dangerous when it comes to the ag operations. There are two large ones that I can think of right now, and in the days of old, they called them bin farmers, but now they're more than bin farmers. They would collect in the product and then ship it out, so they dry it, ship it. There's one on the northwest corner of Macaulay and Thayer. And the only reason I know of it, we're working on the Thayer Road Bridge. And that operation is like a little over 5 acres of impervious, and they had to go through stormwater. And then as a kind of converse, there's one that I don't think it's actually active anymore. Stoddy had one on Pioneer Road on the east side, and that thing's like almost 7 acres. Now, Stoddy's is tucked in the middle of his property. So yes, he's toward the road, I mean, because that's where they come in from, sure. But there's a huge amount of land around it. The other one is tucked at the corner. I mean, it's like on both roads. So if you start doing it, the wording could get a little bit, it would have to be tight enough, but either operation do not cause flooding. I mean, they don't cause an issue. The Stoddy one was done before the days of the stormwater ordinance. So it's been there pre-stormwater. Sure. So, I mean, it makes sense that if you could have enough buffer around you so that you're not damaging your neighbor, the damage would be on you. So obviously you're going to watch your own or create something to stop it from damaging you. On larger tracts, it would make sense. The percentage, to Dan's comment, yeah, to a farmer, 5 acres for their ag operation is, yeah, that's nothing. So just to put it in perspective a little bit.
Oh, I get it. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just, do we do a setback then? That's the only thing that I can think of
I think
that would work, but what would that setback be? And, that's.
I'm very familiar with both sites. So the one on Pioneer Road, yes, is in the middle of the property, and there's a bunch of lowlands and areas where that water goes to. But the other one that I went by that yesterday afternoon, they put up 2 more bins here this fall, which was impervious already. There was a big parking area, but it's at the top of the hill. And it's at the corner of the property, and all the water goes downhill and then ends up in the Nippersink, or some tile.
But they did do stormwater control. I mean, they do have a basin to.
Yeah, there is, and it goes across the road and goes into a big ditch, but you're at the top of.
Yes, you are, you're at the crest of the hill.
You're probably at a 25-foot elevation down to the bottom. You're pretty high up there, so. I get it, there's different scenarios. I'm not an engineer, but I know the water goes downhill from that one, so. And there again, it's at the corner of the property, and if you had a large part, to Dan's part, I get the same thing happen right next door to us. We had that issue on our neighbor's property. He built his new house and barns right by the road. The water went right into the road right away on 173, but he had 70 acres to the north of him, but the water didn't flow that way, so.
I mean, yeah, the other thing is depending on how your property is dissected, if you have 80 acres, the back 70 flows in one way and you put it all in the front 10. So those are tough situations. There are certain scenarios where we'll get a phone call about those components. So that's the only thing is I feel like there's, to whatever the threshold is, there should be some consideration to that. And I don't, I'm not necessarily saying like at half an acre, that's the idea is the half acre and, you kind of go through this process. If you want to avoid that and have more, then yeah, we need to add some additional language to that. Yes.
Not that we have to do buffers, but if you wanted to stick with that idea, could you do like an incremental table? Or like, if you had an acre of impervious, maybe that's a 75-foot buffer. If you want to do like 2 acres of impervious, it's like a 150-foot buffer, unless you get an engineered plan out to saying otherwise.
I would not, because as I understand it, this would be capped at 1 acre. This isn't, you do as much as you want with the buffer, right, Tracy? It's just in addition, it capped at 1 acre that you don't have to do some of this analysis. And then once you're over, then this would get triggered.
This would be restricted to ag land, or?
I would have to think so, because for the municipalities, that's gonna be a problem.
Right, but still, someone's gonna have to calculate what that buffer distance would have to be.
We'd have to
And that's
figure
gonna be
something out.
different on every property.
Right, it could be dependent on the soil type, in theory.
And the lay of the land.
Well, no. Again, you get into a lot of these characteristics, and that's why, coming in and having a tool to then define some of that and, punch it in, that was the idea, is because of just this conversation that we're having, lay of the land, some of these other things. I mean, I'm sure you guys can think, some of you guys, I know you guys are neighbors, maybe you don't speak bad about your neighbor, but, situation where you might have a neighbor where you're like, man, I really am nervous about how this person is doing this or grading this out, or, and so imagine if we have this in here, of the scenario where maybe you're getting affected, and if you start thinking about, well, this factor and this factor and this factor, I think it gets harder to implement something cleanly to just say you can have 1 acre on a 20+ acre parcel because of those components. If there isn't a lot of factors, then okay, maybe we can come up with a scenario and incorporate something for, unless, zoned agricultural, A1 or zoned agricultural land that's greater than 20 acres, then the threshold is 1 acre of new impervious,
Even with an exemption, Stoyan, there is still a need or requirement to come see you. I'll take an example.
Yeah.
Somebody has 20 acres, they say that they want to build a house in the middle of it with a garage and maybe 1 pole barn and drive access to it. If they come into you and say, okay, I'm going to be taking 2 acres of my 20, dead center, on the property.
They gotta have 40 to start with.
Okay, I'm sorry. So you won't let it go. I thought it was gonna be, I thought ag was gonna be handled, but okay, let's say it's a 40 acre tract. I apologize. But if they came into you with the original plan, is okay, look, we're going to build our compound 200 feet in from the road. We're centering it so we can enjoy our beauty. In your office reviewing it,
Yeah.
because they have to, even for an exemption, couldn't they look at it and say, okay, pull up the 2022 topo, okay, fine, even if something were hardened and impervious, the hurt would be on your own 40, so, okay, we'll leave this as an exemption? Or are you saying by exemption, it wouldn't even be reviewed by stormwater?
It would not be reviewed by stormwater because you're 1 acre or less and you have a certain setback. That's what I think Tracy's driving at, right?
So not even a stormwater review, even cursory?
Well, no, it would still get stormwater review, but I would be looking at the details to say it's 1 acre, like currently, a building permit is triggered, stormwater needs to review it. They're less than half an acre or so, we waive all detention requirements. We would still look at erosion control and some of those aspects, but this whole section would basically not apply.
So couldn't the same be, if you had a 20 acre, okay, currently, they have 40, sorry, Dan, I apologize, 40.
Now you wanna say you have an existing 20 acre, your buildings, you already have a farm where these buildings, you have buildings already.
Yes.
You wanna add to it.
Right. And I'm just saying, couldn't the same kind of thing, hey, we looked at it, it's a 40 acre tract, they're only gonna be doing an acre of impervious, okay, and then just like you do with the 20,000.
Yeah, but this has specific parameters. What are the parameters that I tell my engineers to look at? And then the municipalities use the same requirements to eliminate the need for interpretation, and it's different from engineer to engineer.
Okay, I'm looking at
And I think
reasonableness of your people and yourself,
Right.
and you're saying, yeah, the reasonableness is based on this, not just our own good common sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's great that you guys would trust me to do
I would.
that, but
I
I
would.
think long-term, at some point, we're not gonna be here forever, and so that's the idea behind having these parameters. So if I'm gonna look at it and say that there's a certain buffer or setback that we put in place, then yeah, then it can be consistent. I think that's the thing that I wanna make sure we have is consistency through that review process so that everybody's on the same page and, every ag farmer, homeowner, whoever it's gonna be, horse trainer, whatever, commercial, industrial, understands that's what they're gonna get. And so that's why the flood damage component, I wanna change it to flood risk. Well, what's flood risk? Tentative and increase, right? These are hard parameters that there's no other way to interpret it. And so the process to me is clean and concise, and then, to help out from, to some of what Tracy's asking for in terms of providing some ability for the ag community or anyone to have relief of some of these requirements in the engineer, is the development of the simplified method, which would take into account, lay of the land, where you're putting it, and those type of components. And so from that perspective, that's why I was like, well, heck, if it works, so open it up to the full 10%. Instead of having 1 acre, you do this, 2 acres, you do that, 5. If it works for 1 acre, great. If you want to do 5, check if it works, great. And then if it works for the full 10,
And just for clarification, you didn't have to sign the agreement with the county that you're working for the perpetuity of your life? You didn't have to sign that clause, wow. I should have negotiated differently.
So that's I guess that's what I would challenge everyone is if we wanted to have, if we didn't want to do, well, first, I guess, let's just take a step back and look at that half-acre threshold, right? That's kind of been the standard across the board, not just us, but just in general. And I felt like we discussed that, and the majority of everyone felt like that's probably good target to then start taking these considerations into account that we've been discussing. So unless there's a change to that, then I'm okay. And the only thing I'll point out is, running a 1 acre here, this scenario, a 1 acre impervious on this 5 acre parcel.
It's too small a parcel. The suggestion was 40.
I know, but yes, so I'm just saying that if first off, I think we should keep the half acre because of that scenario to make sure we cover ourselves there. And then for the larger ones, sure, we can have a 20 acre scenario at 1 acre impervious with a potential setback. I feel like there's no other way to really do that.
Would it be, I don't know, we're only in a conceptual, would it be gradated up? So you just said 20, okay, Tracy suggested 40, which Dan.
30 or.
But I mean, would you go up and have, no different than our zoning ordinance, or the UDO has in it, would you say, okay, from 1 to 10, 20,000. From 10 to 20, X. From 20 to 40 acres, I mean, would you go up or would you just say, okay, there's one, there's a second?
Yeah, I'd just do 2.
Just do.
Personally,
Okay, thank you.
that would be my take.
Just trying to understand.
If you had enough land, theoretically, you could build an airport without any detention.
Or a massive solar farm.
It would depend on how many acres you went to. I mean, yes.
It's kind of like a jest.
If you did it as a percentage, I agree, you could build an airport.
Yeah,
But-
I would just have 2 numbers.
Oh, just 2 numbers, okay,
Is-
thank you,
is-
just wanted to check.
What I would suggest to keep it simple, again, if we had a gradation table, sure. Yeah, I guess.
The reason I asked it, Stallion, is, okay, if we're looking at 20,000 and we're looking at 1 acre, that's fine. But just off the top of my skull, I came up with 2 operations that are 5 acres, or 5 plus. And so I'm like, okay, so that kind of operation would still have to come in. Even at the 1 acre for 40 or 1 acre for 20 or whatever. A guy who wants to do 5 acres for his farming operation would still have to go for a full permit.
Well, I guess this is under the premise that, yes, some kind of permit is triggered, whether it's an ag building or, 5,000 square feet of disturbance or whatever it is.
I'm just trying to understand, that's all. You're
Yeah,
saying
that-
2
that's-
things, that's, okay.
Yes, that would be my assumption, is that they are in for a permit, so now we're doing the stormwater review, and as part of that review, we're trying to determine if detention is going to be required. The detention review is triggered at a half an acre of new impervious, regardless of the size of the site. So if we want to trigger a 1 acre impervious for sites that are 30 acres, whatever we want to land on, then some of the things that we talked about, lay of the land, location, come into play. And we need to then, to deal with that, well, okay, yeah, setback would, in my mind, would be necessary. And is that gonna be good enough? Or are we gonna create some scenarios?
Well, there's,
I haven't thought of the.
right. There's going to be some scenario that'll fall out of it. It's a problem, I mean.
And I don't mind, if we're capturing, 80% of the issues, 85, we're never gonna get to 100%. So
Thank you.
Yes, if there's one random scenario, no, you guys know me, I will move forward with, with the idea that those are gonna be far and few in between. And then there should be enough guardrails potentially, for the enforcement officer, again, to can maybe take other things into consideration, and what that language looks like, I don't know.
Understood. Thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
So to what I think you were asking, as far as what you've got now, I think we're all happy with that as a blanket for the county. But as long as we got a board member who brought it up, and we've been beating the drum for so long, we would like to see an expansion for the bigger parcels of agriculture, that you have existing facilities there, but you want to build more. And as long as we got the land that'll take the water,
Yeah,
we
but
can get away from
I hear you on that, but what you're asking for is complete relief of having us to review it.
to a certain extent.
Right, so that's where I wanna draw the line of, let's find that middle ground, and that's why I'm saying like, okay, maybe there's a setback, what are all the different things we need to consider to throw into that? And at some point, I will say, what you're gonna find is if you start throwing on, well, you gotta look at this, you gotta look at that, and you gotta look at this, it's gonna drive you to doing this analysis and going to a 10% and getting more out of it anyway, potentially, because those setbacks might not be where you want it. And, so either way, there's still gonna be a component there. This gives you the freedom. I'm open to throwing in something else that's a little bit more constricted, and if you can meet that, great. One of the things I will mention is that, the linear impervious surface is still in here as part of that. So if you're doing a long driveway to an area, maybe we can look at that a little bit closer as a component and driver. And so, yes, there will still be a review, but that review doesn't involve you needing to do anything. It's just staff now confirming some of these components and criteria, confirming where it is, confirming this and that. And then that way, we can say, hey, you don't meet the exemption because of X, Y, and Z, and hopefully that's can be something that comes across and makes sense. Like, okay, these are common sense components that we want to look at because they could be issues. So I'm open to all of this, you guys know me, and if we want to do that, I can throw some test language in here for that and start to think about, some of the implications and what that might mean. And I can try to think of areas that I know have issues and play devil's advocate and, come up with these different property areas and show them, or if you guys know of issues, obviously feel free to, bring those to the table and be like, guys, I don't think, this buffer isn't gonna be good enough because of X, Y, and Z. And I think that's where Tracy and the committee are relying on us to make sure that if we can come up with something great, but it should be vetted and the technical should work and there should be proof of concept. And if we can't get over a certain hurdle, I would rather go back to Tracy and the committee and say, we looked at it, but we have concerns because of X, Y, and Z. And, there's no way to get over those without someone reviewing it more in depth, let's say. Just examples, I don't know.
Hi, I guess I have I'm Ronald Stark, I didn't, alternate for Steve Picking. I just, in terms, I'm sorry, your name was Tracy?
Yeah.
Okay. Just, so, I've kind of been involved in this since the first stormwater ordinance, and the 20,000 square foot exemption in my mind was for the allowance of, okay, we have this old neighborhood as a vacant lot and somebody wants to build a house, is our brand new ordinance gonna make them do detention? And we said, no, for one single infill lot, we want and that 20,000 square foot kind of covers that. So I guess in your case, is it strictly just ag stuff that you're worried about, or?
That's where we're running into the issues with the stormwater.
Right, so So, because what I worry about is, okay, you put okay, if you have 20 acres, you're allowed 1 acre, 40 acres, you're allowed 1 acre. And not say it has to be for ag. Now you can have commercial development, and they're gonna push right up to the limit of how much they can get out of a parcel.
Sure.
And you're mentioned that, hey, you know, I had 20 acres, I could divide it into 4 or 5 acre parcels and I could get more. Well, I mean, you can split it once under the Plat Act. You can't split it 4 times because then it becomes a subdivision, and that probably should be, you know, requiring detention analysis. So I guess I just wanted to verify it was strictly ag that we're talking about, or, and you know, and then you got the gray area of, okay, it's kind of rural agricultural land, and somebody just wants to build a house in the middle of 20 acres. And they're gonna treat it more like residential, or maybe residential with, you know, they want an alpaca in their backyard or something. Where was I going with that? You know, I mean, and you could have, you know, ag-related development, somebody, a farm stand or a tractor repair place, or just whatever exemption you add, you know, if you don't limit it to ag, then that opens it up to all sorts of development.
Yeah, we do currently have ag exempt permits. So obviously we can put on the guardrails that it has to be part of an ag exempt permit, it has to be agricultural use. And, you know, we can throw all of those in there as stipulations to then 1 acre of impervious being the trigger for taking a look on whether or not you need detention.
A question, just a little more hardcore.
Okay.
I believe it was prior to your taking the position. There was a go-around, and I probably heard about it 5 times in my involvement with the Farm Bureau. They wanted to put up a structure on the county fairgrounds, which is still unincorporated area. If I recall, it's like 45 or 46 acres. They literally, the farmers were screaming because of the requirements they had to meet to work with the stormwater ordinance. In the scenario we're postulating, in the scenario we're postulating, would it mean if tomorrow the Farm Bureau came in and said, okay, we want to do a 26,000 square foot impervious element on this existing site, would they then be exempt because they're less than an acre new? Or would you still look at the overall site and say, well, okay, yeah, you got 46 acres, but you know what? You've got, I'm making up a number, 6 acres already impervious. And yeah, you want to do less than 1 acre, but you still have to meet the requirement because, sorry, Charlie, you're over the 1 acre.
Well, I think either way, the existing would be grandfathered in.
Okay, so in theory, if the same scenario that occurred,
I mean, like between currently and what we're proposing, I think in both situations,
okay,
the way that SMO is, the existing would be grandfathered in. So what you're providing detention for would be the access. What makes it difficult is, you know, now you're gonna have potentially flow coming off of these other areas.
Correct.
Which you can incorporate into the design to open up the restrictors more. So but theoretically, let's say you could isolate it all,
okay,
then theoretically you would be grandfathered in the existing conditions and just have to do the new. They could also remove existing grandfather and get themselves credit.
Okay, so they could do, well, they usually don't do that.
I know.
The only reason I mention it is because I believe in part, again, I didn't get into it, all I got was, I'd be in the parking lot at a meeting and I'd have people yelling at me saying, you know what, they're da. So I think they were trying to make the fairgrounds accommodate part of their past sins, if you will. And this was what was causing the headache. So I was just curious as to, because there's a hardcore example that I know it struck within the ag community, long and loud and hard.
I'm unfamiliar with it.
That was a big deal. I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, that would be the same way if it was any existing site that was 85% impervious and they wanted to rearrange things.
Right, because they can take credit if they remove part, and I'm aware of that, yeah.
Again, the only risk there is if you have a known flooding problem, do you then say, well, you were non-conforming, now that you want to And that's the interpretation level stuff that gets difficult.
Thank you.
Those situations are small though, so I'm in no way suggesting you try to tackle any of that, but to have it be a consideration, I think is valid.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, you can, so I don't know the details on that one, but.
I don't really know the details, I just know there was a lot of yelling.
At the time, we didn't have people like Stoyan in the stormwater office.
I said it was pre-Stoyan.
Yeah, this is why I wanna make sure whatever we put in here is clear and defined so that whoever's doing it, there you don't have 5 different interpretations, which I think has been part of the issue with some of this and how it's handled within some of the certified communities. Because of the lack of clarity on how do you prove that this impervious area isn't going to cause a concern. I don't wanna say it's not gonna do anything because you're changing something, but that it's gonna be a minimal risk, right? Yes.
I was wondering, you had that earlier example, where it's like someone owned 80 acres and 20 of it went one way and 60 went another.
Okay.
Outside of just looking at the actual acreage of the parcel, should there be some sort of exemption where you look at the tributary area, like the actual basin itself? Because if you have 1 acre on one side of impervious, but you have like a clear drainage ridge, obviously it's not affecting the other side. So
Correct.
could you not, in theory, have 2 acres of impervious, 1 acre on one side, 1 acre on the other? That's over the total that, you know, our blanket statement would be, but when you look at it just in terms of drainage areas, could that be an exception you could work in?
Yeah, that's how it's supposed to work when you're analyzing it, yes. I just don't know from this perspective, let me go back up here at the, this is a flat 10% on the contiguous property. So, are you gonna allow 10% per each tributary area?
That'd be.
That's what you're asking?
10% per outfall.
Per outfall.
Right. Because then the whole lot would technically be over, but the tributary area wouldn't be, you know.
Here's my take, I'm all for it, because at the end of the day, you have to show what the effect is, right, at that outfall. And so it's either gonna be 1/10 of an increase, or it's not. So theoretically, yeah, I think it would work. When you actually trigger the detention component, I mean, that's what we're doing,
Right.
right? So, yeah, theoretically, I don't see why we couldn't do that. And again, if you're doing that though, it becomes a little bit more complicated. And I think at that point, when you're talking about multiple outfalls, I think we have to consider the need for an engineer to analyze that. Because I think at that point, it's too hard for someone to come in. You'd have to, dissect. We'd have to have a tool that can dissect all of that and kind of do that. I don't.
If your GIS.
Maybe AI gets to that level where we have a stormwater Kennedy County AI, a tool that we can use, right, to kind of do this, and maybe we can get it there at some point. So.
Would that just apply, so this is the exemption that we're talking about. So, if they want to do more complex, then they can do it outside of the exemption
Yeah, yes, so the simplified method would be you point, you click, you get your area, you're not changing tributary areas, and then you're analyzing those flow differences.
If you ever got your GIS to be like Kane County, where you got the tributary area, you could just have a guy click in 2 spots.
Right, but you know how to use that. My concern is does it become too complicated when all of a sudden I'm asking you to analyze all of your outfalls? How many people are gonna be able to do that? Right, so that's the balance I'm trying to strike with having a quote-unquote simplified method. Then yes, you can have your engineer come in and analyze it. By the way, this analysis too, you can make modifications to the outfalls, the way that it drains, throw in BMPs and show that, hey, I've got a 1/10 of a 1/10 of a foot increase. And, you're not necessarily needing detention. Now, there would be a discussion of making sure you're maintaining those BMPs, maintaining that drainage, and, we can have that in the ordinance. That's kind of the go-around circle for it to work together. But yeah, I just, you guys don't get those phone calls with the people that struggle and, and doing the simple things. And so I think that's gonna be a large chunk of the people that are gonna be trying to apply this. Now, we can open up and have pre-app applications for stormwater that happens once a month, twice a month, and have those, to help people that, hey, I don't know how to use a computer. Okay, come in, and staff, goes through this process with them.
You have those currently?
What?
You have those currently?
I mean.
I know you do over the counter.
Yeah.
I've watched people come in, they say, I really don't understand, and you guys are very informative. But do you have like an open session time that, okay?
No.
Second Tuesday of every month, 2 hours, come in, we'll talk to you.
Yeah, it's not an open session, but we do, people say, hey, can I come in? Can we look at
But
this?
sure, that I know, okay.
Engineers do that with us, and so, yeah, let's talk about it. So, yeah, this would be more structured, and it could be like an online thing, sign up for this time slot, come in. We can go through the simplified method and give you an answer if it works. Do we want to charge a fee? Those are probably some of the things that PED ultimately, Stormwater Commission will have to back up, PED will have to approve, but, yeah.
The only thing it would do, no offense, the county is seen like it's a thing. People will ask me questions about health and about you guys, and I'm like, I'm DOT, I'm really not. And unfortunately, yeah, I know enough to be dangerous, so I can give little bits, but my point is, if you could say, when someone would scream, well, that stormwater, they're so terrible, but you'd say, wait a minute. We have open sessions, here are the times, we'll talk to anybody, see anything you want, and give at least a commentary. At least you'd have a defense. Like when Tracy and her group sit there and people scream at them, stormwater's the pits. She could say, wait a second. They give you the opportunity to come in, open forum, just talk to them, and you don't take advantage of that? Who's the pits? You're the pits. Because you're not taking advantage of something being provided. So just a comment.
Well,
That has been discussed.
it's well heard. What I would say to that is if we go to that level, then don't even throw in the 1 acre thing, because we're gonna look at it for you. And we'll give you the full 10% at that point, right? So.
Maybe you're going to, but what happens down the road?
Well, it'll be in here though. So we're gonna set this up, right, so that if it's me or someone else, it'll be in here. To make it, if you guys like this and it gets codified, down the road, if someone wants to change it, they're gonna need approval from that commission. And so you're talking about changing my position, you're talking about the TAC being different, and all of a sudden you get, again, playing complete devil's advocate. You get a certain agenda of people together that you're gonna need someone in my position to back it up, all the TAC members and the Stormwater Commission members, to do that and ultimately vote on.
Tracy, I think the linchpin here is Stoyan. He just can't leave, right? I mean, just make at the next meeting, just make that motion. I mean, just like we just made Bicking the chairman, just make him perpetual and we're done. I don't know what's this problem.
So I want to go back to a comment that was made down here. Does our GIS system show those tributaries?
No, well, I'm hoping, so, and maybe I said this, you had walked in a little bit late. I have a meeting with them. I'm hoping we can get to the point where we can provide that service. This simplified method otherwise won't work. Because again, unless I give the opportunity for the people that don't know what they're doing, like the idea would be, I don't know if you guys are familiar or, well, some of you might be, but there's a tool, IDNR has an EcoCat tool, okay? When you use that, it's pretty straightforward. You answer a bunch of questions, you click a bunch of buttons, and it spits out a result. It doesn't necessarily require an understanding of the underlying basics behind it. that's what I'm hoping to duplicate, but in a way that will provide an analysis, so that when you hit print at the end of the day, you wanna come in for a permit, you provide that printout to us. We can look at it, it's a quick verification, or if we have these open sessions, you're like, you know what, this just isn't for me, and like I said, you guys don't have those conversations with those folks like I do. That would be a way to help them out. And so from that perspective, if we're gonna do that, I don't know how much you guys will want or need the extra half-acre threshold for this process. Because the opportunity will be available for you to come in and take a look at that. And what it can be is you can come in and say, well, can you show me what the full 10% looks like? We can show you that and say, it's not gonna work for the 10%, it'll work for the 6%, 4%. If you want the full 10%, you're gonna need an engineer because you have this big swale or ditch, whatever farming practice you have. I think all of you have that, right? Somewhere on your properties, each have a ditch and a swale. That can be looked at as a unique constraint that the engineer can come in and model and show if you want to go to that full 10%. So that's why I'm saying, like, that's why I feel like if we have the service, a lot of that stuff is built into that service. But I am okay with saying for ag uses, 20, 30 acres, whatever, that review is triggered at 1 acre of new impervious. I'm okay with that as well. And then if you can't make it work, it's the same thing. It doesn't change. So that was why I thought that, going to this idea and calling it our simplified method and then having the engineer ability to back it up, or I don't know, if you're sound enough and you give us a design and you can analyze your downstream conditions, we'll review it. It just, obviously with the professional engineer, it provides cover and stability, but. So, food for thought, I guess, if we want to do the open sessions and have that ability for folks, then do we really need the extra 1 acre buffer setbacks component involved?
I think it's still a good idea to have it in writing,
To have what in writing?
what you just said.
Well, that's what this is, so again, draft language, so you can see here, this would, we would define, we'd probably need a definition for this, or have additional language to show what this means, what the process is like. The idea is when we go live, whatever this looks like, you would be able to go on the website and it would kind of be like a step-by-step process. What's that? Not story time.
Story map.
Story map. If you've ever seen a story map, it kind of like you click or link and then like takes you through that process. I would hope we would be able to develop something along those lines, and if someone wanted to use it on their own, again, they could, or we can supplement that with open sessions.
It'd be a really user-friendly tool. It's kind of a combination of a slideshow and a textbook. And so you're able to go through, and it really is just a very organized way to share information and provide direction. It's a GIS-based tool.
We at the county can call it a Stoyan map instead.
Okay. There you go.
Okay, just checking.
I think we've now created a new definition we have to make.
Absolutely.
But it can be a very usable tool, once again, to make it easier for a good percentage of the public to navigate this without having to hire an expensive engineer or, overcomplicate it.
Why don't we sit on this? I'm gonna draft some language for the 1 acre component, just to throw it in there, okay? And we'll come back and see what that looks like and we can dissect it. I guess the real question, like I'd want to confirm is, and this is gonna lead to the twist, right? Throw out a twist at you guys, I haven't brought that up yet. Are we feeling good that, you know, a 1 CFS increase and let's say a 2 or 2 1/4, is kind of the proof of concept for the exemption? I guess that's the ultimate question from a technical perspective, yeah.
I had one follow-up on the pipe. If you know for a fact that the downstream pipe is like 15-inch, are you guys gonna make like a table for maybe different pipe sizes, or are you just?
No, we're just gonna say 1 CFS and kind of, so I think the idea behind the 24 inches is we felt like most of your culvert pipes, I mean, maybe 18-inch aren't gonna be a 12, right? Your roadways and stuff. Yeah, you're gonna find some, again, you're gonna have whatever, 5% that fall into that area. But I think we felt like for the majority, and that's the same thing with the ditch lines. Are you gonna see anything less than 3 feet, 3 to 1? Sure, you're gonna see a couple of scenarios, but if we're capturing, let's say 85%, 90%, but that is a question, do we wanna reduce it? I can run an 18-inch and see what it is, maybe it's 0.75 CFS.
Well, it would just be like a table, like if you happen to know exactly what was downstream, you could just apply the right value, but I'm fine with 1.
Yeah, but then if they don't know it's downstream and
Or if it gets
you're
crushed or
required,
it's cracked.
yeah, so it's just kind of like, we're gonna make an assumption that we're capturing 90% of, you know, what we would find, and that would kind of be the bottom line. And then in most cases, you might have a 40-inch pipe, you might have a 6-foot wide swale, right? Well, 1 CFS, if it works in a 24-inch and a 3-foot wide, it's gonna work in all of these other scenarios. But yeah, it's gonna miss out on those small percentage of those other sites that don't handle it. So I guess that's the first kind of component, otherwise I need to go back and rerun some scenarios on different criteria. Okay, I hear no comment. So here's the twist, okay? The idea of running the critical duration. I don't have a way of putting that into a spreadsheet. The TR55, this methodology, what they did was they basically ran, I don't even know how many different scenarios, came up with a relationship to have a graphical method. I can't do that with our rainfall distributions and all of that. So the only alternative to comparing peak flows would be to do a rational method. So for my engineers, you know what that is. I haven't run an analysis on it. It would obviously be taking into account time and concentration. It would still be taking into account ground cover, just going to a coefficient. But it would be eliminating the hydrographs. Unless the engineer comes in, you know, the engineer obviously can use the hydrograph method. But I don't have a way to set it up in a spreadsheet where it can capture all of that unless we hire someone to develop that like they did for, so the NRCS came up with that. So that one spreadsheet that I have that I showed you guys that, hey, the NRCS can run this. They can run it because they ran all of these different scenarios, basically created these relationships. And so if you find your area and your time of concentration, you would go to a table, it would give you a value, and you take that value and you can get the peak flow. I can't do that currently with the Huff distributions.
Why can't you do it with a spreadsheet?
Because when
Critical duration?
you run the hydrograph, Mike, you have to do it, it's a bunch of hydrographs stitched together. So you would literally have to go in and, so you get your time and concentration, right? And then I'm not the best to explain this, and trust me, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to brush up on this stuff. But as I understand it, when you pick, you know, there's a certain distribution and there's a time of concentration that then you apply in little slivers to get the peak in that little sliver, then you find the next one and you add it, and you find the next one and you add it. And so when you're doing it hand by hand, you're calculating each one and you're going through, adding your delay. It's a very labor intensive process. I just, and I don't know, maybe.
With all
someone's
you're
done it.
not looking for a hydrograph, are you, for volume, you're just looking for peak?
Well, hydrograph would give you that volume component, obviously, and that's why you have to stitch it all together. If you're looking for the peak, that's why they say go to the rational method as an analog. That's your graphical analog, basically. But the TR55, so here, I'll just show, I'll just.
But you're not looking for the volume, are you just looking for the peak?
Right, but to get your peak, you need to develop your individual peak hydrographs and stitch them together. So each delta D, that time, you're running a hydrograph for that so let's say you want to do 1 minute increments. You run a 1 minute increment using time of concentration of 30 minutes for a 3-hour storm. Then you do it for the next 1 minute increment 1 minute later. Then you do it for the next 1 minute increment 1 minute later. So in order to find that peak, because you got to add the flow on each one to get to your peak, and then that's your rising limb. Did I lose everybody? Brian, I don't know, do you want to jump in and explain hydrographs?
I was just using the bathroom.
So what I said was I don't have a way to take the TR55 has a spreadsheet. The only reason they have a spreadsheet is they developed this graphical relationship here, right here. They developed this so then they can run the spreadsheet. But they used TR20 to run all of these different scenarios to develop these relationships. So you get a time of concentration, you come up here, this is I over P, which is your curve number associated with it, right? So you get time of concentration, you hit one of these, you come here, you get this unit peak discharge number, then you multiply that by your area and the rainfall that you're looking at to get your peak flow. That is a graphical method, but they ran TR20, which is essentially what we're doing. There's no spreadsheet that has TR20. It's very labor intensive, and that's because, again, if you're doing a 1 hour storm with a certain time of concentration, right, you want to run that for, let's say, 10 minutes. So you got to look at the 1 minute segment and get a peak. Then you look at the 2 minute segment, get a peak, and you stitch it all together. That's what makes your hydrograph. That's how you get the peak flow. So the only way to do it in a spreadsheet through the simplified method would be to turn to the rational method. And since we're not looking at volume necessarily, since our data at this point is backed by actually using hydrographs, and we feel comfortable with the 1CFS, that I haven't run a comparison though. What I'd love to do is get a bunch of scenarios, run this to show the flow differences, and then run the rational method alongside it. But we'd have to be very careful on our coefficients, and so there's a little bit more legwork to do there, obviously.
Have you looked at the USGS regression equations for the location as compared to the rational method flows?
I have not, but again,
How would you compare existing to propose doing that, though? I mean, if we're talking about trying to get the 1CFS increment, right?
Yeah, as a way. So I dove into this. I asked ISWS, who developed the Huff distributions. They're running TR20 essentially when they use it.
Okay, I guess the regression equations all have fixed variables.
Yeah, I mean, the new small watershed northeastern Illinois has a factor for impervious, I think.
That would be the other
On a
consideration.
macro scale, but I'm not sure it really boils down to the 40-acre scale well.
And that's what I was going to say, those regression equations, you have assumptions. If you start going on the smaller scale, your assumptions might break down and it's no longer valid.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the twist. We like the critical duration. Looks like everybody was on board and looking at the data. We have the proof of concept. I just don't have a way to simplify it into a spreadsheet and run critical duration.
You're running into a point now where you must just have an engineer.
Well, if you're doing critical, otherwise we can look at what the rational method looks like. It's a similar idea, and so as long as you still are hitting those flow differences of the 1 CFS, 2 CFS that the hydrograph is showing, then theoretically, whether or not I'd have to run, I would love, I haven't done it, but I'd love to like take this example and show what it looks like in a rational method. These flows are definitely, I'm gonna get different flows, that's for sure.
The city of Aurora used to have an old spreadsheet, Derek, maybe you remember this, it was based on a modified rational that you could probably use as a surrogate.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Where you would find one, I don't know at this
You
point.
see Aurora or Chicago?
I said Aurora, but
Chicago does.
Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago does.
We'd have to, or it'd be something similar to that, a modified rational method or something that we can take the area, time of concentration, all of these variables that you can obtain. If it's not a curve number, it's a coefficient, we just have to be very careful of what we choose for those values, because those have ranges too, right? Impervious can be from what, 0.25 to 0.4, depending on the ground cover type.
Is the purpose, Stoyan, of using the rational method, not a critical duration, is that somebody besides an engineer would be doing this?
Yeah, to allow someone to be able to come in, use these tools and say, and that's why it's the simplified, is you just get a quick comparison and it's a yes or no. And I don't know if you're here, Darren, but the reason for the engineer would then be to say, I gave this example of the 80 acres here. If you look at a 1 acre increase, there's virtually no change. If you were to go to the full 10% though, you're gonna get an increase, I think, of roughly 10 CFS. So you're no longer meeting that simple 1, but if you analyze the actual swale, the increase in here is 0.02. So the engineer is still involved, and there's at no point does the applicant not have the ability to go get the engineer, which is gonna be the most accurate assessment. But if we're looking to provide, a simple exemption that someone can use, I just don't have a way to run the critical without some kind of software. Unless again, the county would have to hire someone, run some scenarios, much like this, and develop some kind of relationship that can be used.
I guess we have a lot of engineers in the room, maybe they want to do
Because this is, the tier 55 is specific for the 24-hour event, so you'd have essentially be recreating this.
You would be, and this is specific for SCS type 1 and type 2 storms. So someone would have to do a similar type of analysis for the Huff distributions, yeah.
Well, thank you.
I think if you're doing the rational method, you already have to calculate time of concentration.
Right.
And that's, in my mind, that's.
You're already at the engineering end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I don't think you go to a non-engineer and say, calculate the existing and then the concentration.
With the rational method though, you would still, the idea is you can still use these tools to get a time of concentration because you're gonna get the flow path. So I was,
You're saying your website will calculate the TC for them based on the slope and length of their.
Correct.
water.
And answering is it paved, unpaved? So obviously we're all familiar with this worksheet. We know how to use it. You go and you look at a table, right? The land slope, that triggers what your velocity is gonna be. That can all be inputted, and the program runs it because of the LiDAR data. We're able to, currently our LiDAR data, it potentially is gonna become available online. The contractor has this in there. The only problem is he's got large tributary areas with flow paths. So the idea would be is can we shrink it down so that you can have let's say the property lines carved into that and extract that data and give it to you. So theoretically, yes, and it would be, like the EcoCat, is your proposed surface going to be paved? Is it aggregate? Depending on how they answer, it's going to then direct and pull the number. So you would have time and concentration taken care of. You would have, and based on that time of concentration, we'd be able to get the intensity, right? That would be a calculation. So with some inputs, we can have the spreadsheet calculate this, and then it would produce that rational method flow. But like I said, the only thing is we can't do the critical duration in the spreadsheet currently, or at least no one's developed it like they did for the NRCS type 1 and type 2 storms.
One other thing just to keep in back of mind, it doesn't affect anything you've said, but also realize something. I mean, within my own family's involvement, I've had to deal with farmers for over 50 years. And in that time, that farmer has a gut intuition because he's sat on the machine, he's looked at it, he's worked that land, he's been on it. And everything that's being said, in a different way, they've done it. They know what they can do or can't do to that field before they get an eroded ditch or before they have to restore a ditch. And they know, and so, although I understand everything you're saying, just realize those farmers have been staring at that same piece of property for decades. And when you come in and go, well, that's not gonna work, they're still gonna look at you like you have three heads and say, I'm telling you, I know what it can. And so just a back note, that's all it is, not for any input into an ordinance, just letting you know.
I don't disagree. I think the idea behind that process though would be, well, hey, this is why we designed a simplified method. And it's not gonna work for you because you need to get more detailed and specific on it. And once they do that with an engineer, then it will work. And you know, that's the part where we're trying to provide an additional service from the county's perspective to folks with simpler projects and things like that, to just allow them to avoid the heavy fee. I mean, let's be honest, my engineers here, are you guys even gonna take a single family residence guy that wants to do a 30,000 square foot house addition? You're probably not gonna take that on, right? Individually?
I mean, we can do.
But we need to charge to set up the job numbers probably more than they wanna pay.
Right, so that's my point, is there's a need for that service anyway, because you're either paying really high fees, just because of the type of work that most of my engineers do. Outside of Thomas, he does take on some of those smaller ones, but we even had a conversation the other day, I forget which one, where, you know, you were looking at it and you're like, I don't know that he's gonna be amenable to my fees. So there's a need there. And I'm not saying that it's perfect, but it's enough to at least provide them the ability to try to use it. And you know, we can say, yes, there's assumptions built into this and et cetera and et cetera. And if it works, great, we filled their need. If not, then they're gonna have to make a decision on hiring someone at the fee that it is if they really want that block. So, you know, outside of the ordinance, I feel like there's that lower area that is not receiving, you know, service, if you will. So that would be kind of how I would counter that, is trying to provide something for those folks.
And why pay $200 an hour to design it right when you can just hire a lawyer at $500 an hour to refute it, right?
That's a special breed of applicant. Interesting. Falls in that 5% category again, that you know, no matter what we do, they're still gonna go down that path, so.
Just one other thing to think about, since this will be documented in our ordinance and then put into practice, the people that will be doing the work on the pole barns or whatever are gonna know that this is what you need to meet in order to get through the process quickly. It'll be a self-regulating system. You know, these guys have put a lot of work into it and tried to make it, you know, as simple, but capturing the real need. And I do think that if we write it right, that it will be self-perpetuating, because the contractors will want to be able to, you know, hey, I can get you through this real quickly. And I do think that that'll be part and parcel of the practice at that point.
Not if you have the Amish.
I was just gonna say.
Again, that 5%.
Not let the Amish do it.
So, and I know I'm looking at the time, so why don't, and if there's more discussion, that's fine, I don't want to cut anyone off, but why don't I run the rational method for you guys as a comparison? You know, personally, I don't know, I want to see that data myself before we go there. See what it looks like, maybe we can make some modifications, I'll show you guys the results and comparisons between the two. And I'll throw in the language about the 30-acre one, I'll figure that out, buffer thing, or at least I'll have it in there for discussion to kind of wrap up this section. So we didn't, we can take a look at that. I did quickly want to touch, I have not changed this. We've discussed the impervious reductions. I kept the same examples before, but in the essence of now going through the simplified method, I thought it ties together again, where you're looking at the existing versus proposed conditions. And so I don't know if there's any questions on this. And one of the changes we were thinking about is, we can define this better. We get there. Is in these numbers, we had 0.85 for impervious areas, 0.3 for cleared areas, which we haven't defined yet, but those would be like wetlands or wooded areas that are providing benefit. Maybe we just call it 0.85 across the board to simplify it. I don't necessarily want to make two separate reductions as part of that. And then, haven't really looked at the 2-year from that perspective. And if we want to have a 2-year or not, I guess that would be a question I'd want to ask the group. But I have not run any 2-year data for you guys, so I can do that just to bring it full circle. So the idea would be running rational method we proposed for the first part, running the 2-year, doing a full analysis here for this part to show what that would look like. And I did have a chance to talk to ISWS about this idea. They mentioned they ran similar type study for MWD not too long ago, and asking them about this 0.85 target, they felt that actually it might be a bit high, but I feel like that's maybe a good thing, because as part of the watershed study, this is obviously capturing on a small parcel level. I don't know what this type of requirement is going to have on an overall watershed. And so I think that's something that we're trying to bake in to kind of, again, have proof of concept. And I don't know if this goes down or that way it gets very per watershed perspective, but I just wanted to give you guys a little bit more information on that particular number. And again, the idea here is the old method is just this 0.15, doesn't factor in existing conditions. So we're trying to make sure someone isn't taking 40 acres. We talked about these different outfalls, right? From a land development perspective, you're going to try to do one detention basin to maximize that area. So now you might have outfalls that are being consolidated to one location. So now the proposed 2-year storm might be larger than the existing 100-year, let's say, depending on how much area comes in, right? So this now requires you to look at those existing peak or 24-hour releases, and your reductions are based off of those. So if someone brings in more area, that's where you get hit with a larger reduction. And obviously, it's meant to incentivize the less impervious area you introduce, the less detention. The more impervious area you introduce, the more detention you're going to have, and that kind of falls in line with our conversation. So I just wanted to throw that out as kind of a last topic. We've discussed this the last 2 sessions. I haven't had really anyone come out against it, or I don't know if there's additional scenarios, or I would encourage you guys. The idea is once we come up with this stuff, we're going to let you loose with it. So our simplified method, the tools we develop, we're going to have you guys, break it and all of that stuff. But if you have a scenario that's rattling around in your mind, either email me, I'll try to put it together, or if you want to come back with some numbers to say, hey, there's an issue here with this concept. But as I mentioned previously, the Stormwater Commission, they like the concepts. It's just up to us now to make sure we get the technicals and all of that working correctly.
Stoyan, as I kind of jotted down, you're taking on a lot of things. You sure you don't want to push off the March meeting to April? Just so you have enough time. I mean, I'm jotting down, like, oh, he's gonna do that, he's gonna do that. He's gonna- It's like, wow, well, I mean, that's a lot.
At this point, I have a lot of these models, you know, so I can just go in and toggle them. But yeah, I'll see where I'm at, I guess. At least for, you know, for this session, you know, I keep regurgitating the same ones because I don't know, you know, I don't know what other examples to run for you guys, you know, this one.
It's gonna be hard to find a piece of land that Mike doesn't run, so, you know, if you do look for another one, really go way out there, okay?
Well, you know, and just to revisit as a reminder, you know, this one is a real permit that we got. And this was a depressional area, so they, you know, here's the existing conditions and the proposed conditions. That's what they did. They want to run all of this down here to a single detention basin. So now this outfall point is 7.56 versus 3.69. So the way the reduction would work, they were proposing 5.45 acres in here. So you multiply that by the 0.85. So here in the table, here's the existing flow. Here's what that comes out to, the 5.45 times 0.85. So when you subtract the two, they're getting, you know, it's basically a negative release. We talked about that. You either, you know, hierarchy, you go back to maintaining existing drainage patterns, you try to do infiltration, or we stick you with the existing two-year as your allowable release. So, you know, in that upper tributary area, because they're removing some, they're not proposing a lot of impervious, they're proposing 0.11. So when you look at that, that's a reduction of 0.09. So actually, because they're reduced their tributary area, for number stays the same, they actually end up with a lower flow than what's allowable, so that would be acceptable for that outflow. And then I had the condition of, you know, the extreme condition of the solar farm. Everything comes down to the creek here. This upper area currently flows out this way. I showed you guys the grading, you know, like let's say this becomes commercial, there's enough outfall, they're gonna do one detention basin down here to maximize all this area. But again, here were the tables. So here's the existing flows. I took their proposed data. So because of the natives, their curve numbers are coming down. So they're showing decreases in those flows. And that, you know, that's part of kind of, you know, the ag idea too, is really the impervious is this linear surface. So trying to capture that with detention in the infrastructure, and this trying to go back to ag potentially after 30 years or 40 years for the lease. If you have all of these detention basins and storm sewers, it makes it hard to go back. You know, so this shows how it works on those different scales, and everything in between those numbers are there. So the only thing I didn't incorporate as part of those is any of the clearing. I didn't include any potential clearing. But that would be defined what we mean, which areas, you know. And we'd have to maybe, you know, for areas that are cleared, even though it's wooded, what if it's all buckthorn? So, you know, from that perspective, maybe we need to think about, you know, if the applicant wants to say, well, hey, that's all invasives, maybe they provide a tree survey to show that, hey, it's all buckthorn, it provides no real benefit, or we can, you know, those details come next. So it's just, again, this was meant to be, do we have, you know, running some of these models, we feel good, there's proof of concept, except for the rational method idea, which I will run for you guys because I want to see that too. And then we start, you know, this draft language here that's super rough, starts to get finalized. We start adding definitions to these things. What does the cleared area mean here? You know, that gets better defined. And do we want to just do 1.85 versus a 0.3? The idea behind the 0.3 is it's not necessarily going to impervious, they're just clearing it. You know, so giving some allowance there, not being as, that's the idea behind it. And obviously this would be on the engineer level, so I think as engineers, you guys get this. So I'm not afraid, but obviously it's one extra thing that could trip someone up. You know, simplifying it to one reduction. Yeah.
Looking at the detention from a developer's perspective, it does make things a little bit trickier. I mean, the nice thing about the 0.15 CFS per acre is that you could use the nomograph, and from, like for a developer that's looking at 4 or 5 different sites, it's very easy to identify how much detention you're gonna need for the site, because it's not based on existing conditions, it's just based on 0.15 CFS per acre. So if I'm a developer or an engineer or whoever looking at multiple properties, now I'm having to analyze the existing conditions for each one of those properties. And somebody who owned a property, let's say if you owned a property that was steeper or not as steep, and so that changes the time of concentration and the existing release rate, I mean, ultimately that affects the marketability of your property, because it affects how much detention somebody's gonna need if they were to develop it. So it just adds a lot of, this methodology adds, a lot of complications when you're looking at multiple properties, or if I'm an engineer asked by a developer to look at a property and say how much stormwater detention do I need. It's no longer a simple 0.15 CFS per acre, here's the volume, here's how much area you need. It's multiple calculations, and the existing landscape significantly changes that.
Well, what are you referring to by multiple properties? Several farms rolled into one?
No, I'm talking more about, like, let's say I am
more subdivision level.
Yes, like if I'm developing, I want to develop a subdivision, I'm Pulte Homes. And, I'm looking at this market, I want to come in and look at McHenry County, and I hire an engineer and somebody to look at, multiple properties. One 200-acre property in Huntley, one outside of Harvard, and one outside of Woodstock here. Previously, it was fairly simple for the engineer to look at that property and determine how much area would I need for detention, which then helps that subdivision or Pulte to determine is it an economically viable situation for me to look at. Now I've got to, as that engineer, I've got to do a lot of calculations on each one of those properties, and that affects Pulte, but it also affects the property owners too, right? Because if I'm one of the properties that they're looking at and mine happens to be steeper or not as steep, that affects how much land is going to have to be set aside for detention. And so I'm just saying, kind of just so we're all aware that this is going to require a lot more calculation, and it will have impacts that maybe we're not thinking of yet.
Yeah, I was prepared for your question. I thought, and I think Mike had brought this up previously, when you're analyzing sites, if you lose the nomograph, what is it going to look like? With the idea that the tools we're preparing is gonna be the same idea, where you can take your areas impervious, you're pointing and clicking on a map, so you're using an aerial, right? It's spitting out that information, and it's gonna automatically tell you what your existing proposed flows are, so you can see, have a tool so you can see those numbers. We can develop a sheet, that again can give you an idea, but if you know how much you need to release, I would imagine from that perspective, you should be able to figure out how much volume you're gonna need, or we can provide, I would think we can provide a chart for that to be used, to help with that analysis. But that was the thought process, is that if we're gonna have these tools available, then you're gonna be able to crunch those calculations fairly quickly. So yes, you're basically doing those, right? I mean, I haven't done it in some time, but that was the thought process that I was thinking about, is you're already looking at an aerial, so clicking a button, getting that information, plugging it in. It's a very similar process, so instead of looking at a chart, you're just using the tool to spit out some of those numbers and get you those answers to help reduce that burden of now having to actually analyze each site. and run, run a full analysis, let's say. If that makes sense.
I would have to do a lot of work with that tool to have the level of comfort to be able to make those decisions.
Well, and that's the goal of creating that, to let you guys run wild with it, right? And be able to use it, but the idea is it would be simple enough. So if the owner can use it, you will be able to get the flows, and again, we can have an estimation process for that. So you can have estimated percentage of impervious. Your existing conditions aren't gonna change, right? So
That's
then,
correct. You still have to analyze.
You have to quantify the existing conditions.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, no,
Which is
I mean,
debatable.
but what I'm saying, I guess what I'm saying is currently you're doing some level of analysis, you're just not factoring the existing conditions into it, right? So the only additional step is now you have to worry about the existing. That's where our tool should hopefully, be a part of that. Or, if you know your area, you can get a general curve number and, some of these things, it should still give you the ability to make those calculations. I have to imagine you're still making certain assumptions that are gonna carry over regardless of the two methods.
I don't know, I mean, right now, do you make?
I don't know, throwing it at you.
There's nothing required for existing conditions, and so now it's just all of, it's very cut and dry to make some of those initial calculations. I think it's gonna be different now, because every time your impervious changes, you're gonna have to redo that. You've gotta go to the zero release, then you're calculating the 2-year existing.
No, it's fine.
I don't know, it seems to add in quite a bit of additional work.
Well, hopefully that's a good thing from your end. Well, I agree, Dan. That's where we wanna, in our eyes at least, from if we're the county, we're thinking about flood mitigation, how this stuff works. It all seems to kind of come together from that perspective. It takes care of the adequate downstream capacity questions, because you're not going to be really running into that, because this takes care of it. And so, to your point, I feel like you guys are going to be savvy enough to figure it out. And that at some point, you're going to need to do a deeper analysis, right? And so I feel like you guys are going to be savvy enough with these tools to be able to make some assumptions and get a pretty good idea of where you're going to stand, and allow your client to make a decision to dive deeper, I suppose. And so while that's gonna impact you, it's gonna impact everyone equally. So that would be kind of my defense is yes, it's gonna be a change, but it's gonna be a change that it's gonna impact everyone equally. And as we move forward, again, we can certainly start looking at developing other spreadsheets that would take into account that you can use, or charts, modified methods, et cetera, to take that into account. So, I don't know, if there's no other comments. I haven't driven you off, you just kind of need to think about, look at it, see what it looks like, right? So I think from that perspective, we would certainly, I'd certainly want to run the next set of examples for the rafting method and talk with GAS and, put it together so you guys can use it. Because in theory, if we like it, you guys still need to be able to use it. I want to know what you guys think about it, right? And you guys think about it, and then, we can obviously make additions to that. So estimations, other additional estimations and things. If you're able to get the area, time of concentrations, you can assign curve numbers and do all that. I mean, I don't know what else you need from there, right? That's what you're doing normally for the proposed conditions. You're just going off a chart. So maybe it's a new chart that you use, or I feel like it's doable, but you're right. It has to be rolled out and executed, and people need to be able to use it 100%. I'd be the first to agree there. So.
what do you think the time frame is to get the tool out?
I gotta talk to GIS.
Like a beta version?
I gotta talk to GIS this upcoming week and see what their response is. So, it's gonna impact, obviously, I would not feel comfortable, if we have all the language and everything sorted out, I would not be comfortable rolling this amendment out until that's in place, absolutely. And until I can figure out what GIS is and get an update and start to figure that out. That will be a component of it, yeah. So I don't have I wish I had a time frame for you, but.
What's the last version of the SMO was from what year? Is it
2020,
2020.
So with that, if there's no other discussion at this point, I'll move to, there's no new business or report, so just something to put on your radar for future topics. We are gonna start looking at our wetlands section with some of the Army Corps changes and just looking at it. We're refining our PJD process, so that will hopefully be a part of the next agenda, or at least a discussion we'll provide to you while we're, working on finalizing the proof of concept and then developing the tool and developing the language. And this is gonna have a domino effect, as I mentioned on the ordinance. If, looking at that adequate downstream capacity section, maybe most of that gets removed. So there will be additional items that I will be, if we run with this, now I have to go through and see how it affects all the other sections. So there's still more work to do there as well. But if that's the direction we want to move towards, we'll continue to provide that data, provide an update with the tool, and be ready with the other sections amended that are affected by this.
Got a question on wetlands.
Sure, on the topic.
Are you, would you consider creating McHenry approved wetland banks that are smaller than the Army Corps bank size?
The big challenge with that is oversight. We really don't have the staff to do that type of oversight. If there were a funding mechanism that could support hiring a consultant, maybe that's something that could be done, but right now the Wetland Restoration Fund is really the only viable option that we have. We certainly have talked about mitigation banks, but like I said, we just don't have the expertise and the manpower in-house to oversee that. So if you want to put some brain power towards how that could be funded and implemented with an external contractor, hiring a third party, that may be a viable option, but that would really be a reach at this point. Since we are likely, with all the changes to the jurisdiction, it used to be 80% wetlands would fall under core jurisdiction, 20% under county. That's been completely flipped, if not 90% county, 10% core now. And so we do need to build up make our wetland regs and more robust. But that may be for a future SMO revision. We'd certainly entertain it if it can be thought out, but that would be a big change and a big ask.
One other component to that we're gonna roll into this, and I don't know where it's gonna fall, is looking at solar farms specifically and some requirements in terms of site preparation and things like that, to help with that vegetation being established, so it's not mostly weeds and things like that. We've learned a lot at this point, so it's something we're gonna be tackling. I don't know if that's gonna be something separate or it's gonna get kind of sprinkled. It's gonna be part of our whole wetland conversation, because we are seeing these go in farmed wetlands, next to wetlands, and how we handle mitigation and things like that. We're still working within the current regs, but in thinking about it more, there's certain changes that we wanna make and certain things we wanna put in the ordinance so that it's covered, like performance standards and some of those ideas, so that we can have some more teeth to enforcement if needed. So just FYI, that'll kind of be built in there, but how it fits into different components, we'll see. So if you're hot on solar farms, that's gonna be your opportunity to shine.
Say hot about them or hot for them?
I don't know, whatever way, however they make you feel, it's whatever certain way, that'll be your moment there, I guess. But, so, just a little peek into that, and, but if there's nothing else, yes?
If I can make an announcement at the very end.
Okay, well, we're on announcements, so we'll start with Scott, go ahead.
All right, so we're going to be holding our second annual Lake McHenry MS4 training workshop. Last year we did it and just had a great turnout. I mean, it overwhelmingly successful. We're going to do it again this year. We're looking at May 15th as our date. It's a Friday, May 15th. We are going to hold it at Lake County again. Lake County has 60 MS4 communities. We have less than 20. So just for that reason, we're going to continue holding it at Lake County. But we will have an in-person and a streaming option. So far, I have Jeff Edstrom from the IEPA. He's going to be talking about funding opportunities and green infrastructure. We're gathering, Brad Andresen will be one of our speakers, talking about the practical applications of managing green infrastructure. So it's going to be a great program again. I just want to get it on your radar. You'll be getting multiple emails from me as we get it developed, but I just want to let you know that this was coming. So, and then the attending the MS4 workshop can then be used as part of your compliance with your MS4 permits.
And I have one other announcement to make. I'm gonna be holding SMO certification training, so that's gonna involve most of my engineers here as part of Certified Communities. We've got 2 dates lined up currently, one in April, one in May. We're gonna roll out the email to that. If you are an enforcement officer, you're gonna need to attend. So you can do it virtually as well. It's probably gonna be 3-hour commitment. We'll roll out some PDHs for you engineers as part of that. But just FYI, that is coming for municipalities involved. If municipality staff wants to attend, I would highly encourage it. That'll be in my emails, just because I know sometimes there's the disconnect between staff reaching out to some of you guys at the certified community level, making you aware, and just to have them be involved. So it's gonna kind of go through a lot of the issues that I see or the questions that I get. I'm not gonna try to get too much in the weeds, but it's meant to be, you guys come, it's an opportunity to go through it and bring up questions and kind of Q&A style throughout the whole thing as a training. So that's why I'm thinking it'll probably be on a 3-hour timeline, if you will. But that will be a requirement. Anyone who's involved as a contact for that certified community will need to attend. They need to track that, and then we're going to give out certification. So hopefully you can make one of those two. In the case that someone can't, I will work with those people and try to see what we can do to accommodate anyone that slips through the cracks on either of those days.
Which were the dates?
April and May, I forgot. Let's see. I have to, you know what, I'll have to search. It should be coming. Where did I email about those? Well, I have to get those. I think one of them is April 13th, I want to say.
It's a Monday.
No. April 15th. Yeah, it might be that Monday, somewhere in April, I think this week of April. And then one in, I think this May 7th. I want to say. Who's the lady at, what's her name?
Christie,
Yes.
you want me to run over and see?
No, I'll find her. I'll expose my email to her. April 7th, afternoon 1 to 4, May 19th, morning 8:30 to 11:30.
So it is April 13th.
Huh?
It is April 13th.
No, April 7th.
Oh, I'm sorry, 7th, okay.
So, April 7th is Tuesday. And May 19th is a Tuesday. Didn't mean to do 2 Tuesdays, but, so there will be a virtual option as part of that. If you want to come in person, we're basically going to have the full length with tables. So we'll have packets printed, so you can write on them, ask questions. If you're online, we're gonna have staff online bringing up questions, or they can answer questions, so. First time doing it, hopefully it goes well, and I'll learn. But,
They'll have the same thing, each one.
what's that?
They'll have the same
Yeah,
agenda. for
it'll
each
be the
one.
same agenda, so, and we'll roll out those PDFs. I have pretty much everything together. There's a couple of things that I want to add related to like annual reports and things like that, so, but it'll be nice if anyone has any questions and things like that, so. All right, with that, do we want to adjourn?
So move.
All right.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Next time.
Thank you.